Coming to you from the Forge of Freedom studio in the heart of America. A podcast dedicated to preserving freedom and inspiring personal success. Freedom is born and lives through you, the individual, and it dies in the shadows of tyranny. Motivating our listeners to become well-rounded, freedom-minded people with the body of an athlete, the mind of a stoic, and the spirit of a warrior. The tree of liberty lives on through you, the Forge of Freedom. And now here's your host, Alex Uli.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Forge of Freedom podcast. I'm your host, Alex Uli, and today I have a special guest back on the show, Jacob Hornberger. Among the many hats that Jacob wears, he is also the author of the book, My Passion for Liberty, which is the topic of today's episode. For those of you who have been following the show for any period of time, Jacob was on the show a few months ago to talk about his book, The Tyranny of Gun Control, and I'm excited to have him back here today to talk about one of his other books, My Passion for Liberty. So, Jacob, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Alex. I had such a good time last time and appreciate you having me back on.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you did. I enjoyed our conversation as well, and I look forward to chatting about my passion for liberty. As we were talking pre-show, your path mirrors mine in lots of ways. So it really struck a chord with me as I was reading through your book, and of course, I enjoyed your talk about how you came to libertarianism, but your discussion about how you came to libertarianism, but also your discussion of some of the more policy points about things like immigration and drugs and foreign policy, et cetera, which we'll get into here in a little bit. But before we do, I just want to give a brief introduction for those of our listeners who may not be familiar with you. 40 years ago, over 40 years ago now, when Jacob was a young trial lawyer in his hometown of Laredo, Texas, Jacob discovered the libertarian philosophy, it's a discovery that changed the course of his life. And Jacob is now a candidate for the 2024 Libertarian Party presidential nomination, which we'll also discuss later in the show. He's also the founder of the Future of Freedom Foundation, a nonprofit educational foundation whose mission is to present the principled case for the libertarian philosophy. He's also the recipient of the LP's Thomas Paine Award for Outstanding Communicator of Libertarian Principles. Jacob details in this book his life's journey from the courtroom to the world of libertarian education and explains how liberty became the passion of his life. At the same time, he describes in a clear and easy to understand way the core principles of libertarianism and how they are the key to resolving the political and economic crises we face in society. This book describes why we should oppose socialism, interventionism, mandatory charity, the drug war, the regulated and managed economy, the Federal Reserve, public schooling, foreign wars and empire, immigration controls, and so on. In his introduction to the book, former presidential candidate Ron Paul states, "When I hired new staff and brought in new groups of interns, I would always recommend that they read everything they could get their hands on from Jacob Hornberger's Future of Freedom Foundation. Jacob's book is a battle cry against the tyranny of the state. His is not an offensive battle, but a fight to defend us against a state that wants to trample us, rob us, and ultimately kill us. That is why I am so happy to see that Jacob has written this very personal memoir of his life, and especially about his conversion to libertarianism. I am proud to call Jacob my good friend, and I am so pleased that he has written this book." So, having said that, you couldn't get a much more glaring endorsement from a much more respected person in the liberty movement, Ron Paul. But having said that, and having read the book myself, I can say that I also highly recommend this book and anything else you've written. And of course, the newsletter from the Future of Freedom Foundation, I think, is excellent, and people should go and check out as well. So with that said, if there's anything I've missed in the introduction there, Jacob, please fill in. But once again, I'm happy to have you here to talk about your book.
Well, that's great. No. It's a very nice introduction. And yes, it's a tremendous honor to have Ron Paul say such kind words about me. That Ron is one of my real life heroes. This guy serves as such an inspiration for me and has served as an inspiration for so many years. And it's always an honor to be invited every year or practically every year, to speak at his foreign policy conference at Dulles, Virginia. And when he wrote that, I asked him to write the introduction, and I never expected anything like that. And when I read it, it's like, wow, it just blew me away.
Yeah. Yeah. One of your biggest achievements, I'm sure, is getting that sort of endorsement from such a respected and honorable person. Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. If you let me digress here for a moment.
Oh, absolutely.
That when I first started the Future of Freedom Foundation, our mission at FFF has always been to present the principled, uncompromising case for libertarianism. And in my very first year in our monthly publication, I wrote an article called Letting Go of Socialism, where I talked about repealing Social Security and Medicare and the same positions I hold today, and also opposing school vouchers and saying that this is just another socialist vehicle, which it is. It uses taxation to take money from one group of people and give it to another group of people. And lo and behold, I get criticized by none other than Nobel laureate Milton Friedman, who makes reference to my article and vehemently disagrees. But in disagreeing, he said, I want to say something about the Future of Freedom Foundation. It's doing great work. And this was like, wow, to be criticized, even though Friedman was disagreeing with me on the voucher issue, to be complimented by this guy. It's like, wow, I was on cloud nine.
Well, in Milton Friedman, a very well-respected person in the liberty movement, even though he disagreed with you, apparently he felt that your views had enough merit or weight to deserve a response. So at least there was that, even though he disagreed, right?
Exactly. Yeah. It just blew me away that he was reading our stuff. I mean, it was our first year, but that he really considered the work that we had been doing, even up just to that point in our first year, was worthy of mention and worthy of a compliment. It's one of those unforeseen things that happens in your life. You write an article and something really good comes out of it, even in the midst of the disagreement that he and I had. And here's a Nobel laureate disagreeing with me. That was pretty hot stuff for me.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing. And we'll get to that. When we talk about how you got into, or how you started the idea for the Future of Freedom Foundation and developed that organization, sort of get into the path that brought you to that, and the sort of dilemma that you faced when you were practicing law and were faced with the choice whether to pursue your passion for liberty or to continue to practice law. And so we'll get to that here in just a little bit. But one thing I love about this book is that, unlike many books advocating for liberty, this one really highlights, and you do this in numerous circumstances, but it highlights the false choice really between Republicans and Democrats, which are both essentially just slightly different flavors of big government. And like you say, you make the no compromise case for liberty. And that's refreshing, because when I started out in sort of my path to libertarianism, my first introduction was to these sort of beltway organizations like Cato, like Reason, which have some great content and have some great folks, but they don't always have the no compromise position, the really principled approach for liberty. And so when I found the Future of Freedom Foundation, when I found the Mises Institute, when I found FEE, those sorts of organizations like yours were really refreshing, because there was a consistent application of principle. And I think that's what people will find in your work at the Future of Freedom Foundation, and then also in your book. With that said, would you mind to say a little bit about what was your path to libertarianism? I know in the book you talk about growing up in Laredo and how you found a series of books at the public library. Would you mind to start there and really tell the audience what inspired you to pursue liberty?
Yeah, well, I grew up in Laredo, Texas, in the 1950s and 60s, and we were told by the Census Bureau at that time that we were the poorest city in the United States per capita income. And I was fortunate to live in a middle class family. My father was a lawyer, but there was no doubt that this was an extremely poor city. I mean, the people in the barrios were living like in shacks. The standard of living was extremely poor. And we knew that. Everybody in Laredo knew that. Uh, and so I grew up with that kind of ambiance, with middle class but deep poverty all around me. And then right across the river was Nuevo Laredo, and the poverty in Laredo, as bad as it was, didn't even compare to Nuevo Laredo. I mean, you'd cross the bridge and there was just enormous poverty, deep poverty. And so I grew up there. I grew up on a farm on the Rio Grande. We hired illegal immigrants on our farm. They were the hardest working people I've ever seen. I had experiences with the Border Patrol. They came into our farm one day without a warrant when I was in high school. They busted all our workers. These workers were our friends, and my brothers and I. We'd worked out in the fields with them, baling hay, and we'd eat with them. We'd play football with them, and all of a sudden, it was a very traumatic experience for my two brothers and me when the Border Patrol came in and busted them. And we knew we'd never see them again. And these guys were our workers and our friends. And then when I was in high school, I was going to the beach one day and to meet friends. And the Border Patrol agent just pulls me over for no reason at all. He just turns on his light. And these are what are called roving Border Patrol checkpoints. And he says, open your trunk. And I said, you don't have the authority to do that. And he says, you got a choice. You can open your trunk here, or you can follow me back to headquarters. Well, in retrospect, I wish I had followed him back to headquarters, but my friends were waiting for me at the beach, and it was our house that we were going to. And so I said, to heck with it. And I opened up the trunk. But this is what living under a police state is like. This is what people do not understand, that there really is a police state down there. When you leave Laredo and head north, you hit a checkpoint like 40 miles north of the city. You think you're in Mexico entering the United States, because it's all the Border Patrol and immigration services are at this checkpoint. So that was the kind of life I had growing up. I grew up as a Democrat. My dad was active in politics. I campaigned for Lyndon Johnson and John Kennedy when I was in the 5th grade. My dad took me to a barbecue at Johnson's Ranch. I met Lyndon Johnson, shook hands with him, had a short conversation with him. So then I went off to college at Virginia Military Institute and got an economics degree there. Got commissioned U.S. Army Infantry, 8-year reserve commitment, 3 months at active duty at Fort Benning, Georgia at infantry school. And then I went to law school at the University of Texas. And then I returned in 1975 to practice law with my dad. And I was a Democrat. I really believed that there was a legitimate role for government to take care of the poor. I couldn't understand why anybody would object to that. I mean, to me, it was the government's money. Why shouldn't the government do what it wants with its own money? And then one day, Alex, I walked into the public library in Laredo, Texas, looking for something to read. And I went over to the political science section, and I saw 4 little different colored books there. And I pulled volume 1. It was volume 1 through 4. And I pulled volume 1 off the shelf, and I started perusing this thing. And it was incredible. I mean, it was truly a road to Damascus experience. As I'm reading these essays right there, I'm just perusing them, I can feel the inches thick indoctrination that I'd received in public schooling in Laredo and in college as well, law school, just cracking apart. And the big lie that I realized I'd been living is that we live in a free society. And what these essays did from an economic standpoint was they showed me that was just a big lie. And so I checked out all 4 books. I took them home. I pored over them. And they really achieved the breakthrough for me that made me realize that we do not live in a free society, and especially economically speaking. And it was at that moment where I said, I want to live in a free society before I die. I mean, I want to do everything I can to do this. And so my passion became libertarianism. I set aside all my trial books that I'd been studying. I mean, I'd been studying books on direct examination, cross-examination, jury summation, all the things about trials, because I was a trial attorney. I was going to conferences for, trying cases and so forth. And I set all those aside and started reading everything I could by Ludwig von Mises, Frederick Bastiat, Leonard Read. And then I discovered that the Foundation for Economic Education, which had published these 4 books, was still in existence. The books had been published 20 years before in the 1950s. And so I immediately contacted FEE, as the Foundation for Economic Education is known. I went up to a spring seminar. I met Leonard Read, Leonard Read is the biggest influence in terms of libertarianism for me. And then I went to a summer seminar, and that was a big point in my life, that Road to Damascus experience. Later, my father passed away. I moved to Dallas and started my own law practice, and had been there about 4 years when I was faced with this choice that you talked about, that a big out-of-town law firm contacted me and said, we want to talk to you about becoming manager of our Dallas office that they were just opening up. And I was struggling there because I had started my own practice there. So this was going to change my life, to become managing partner of a big out-of-town law firm that was establishing their office in Dallas. And at that same time, FEE, Foundation for Economic Education, offered me a job as program director. And now this was the real turning point in my life. I went to the beach down at Port Aransas, Texas, and walked down the beach and did a lot of soul searching and prayer, because I wanted to be a lawyer since I was a kid. And I mean, I knew this was the big turning point in my life. And so after that weekend, I just decided I got to go where my heart is and my passion is. And so I contacted all my clients and told them I was leaving the practice of law, and I packed my bags and moved to just north of New York City and joined the staff of the Foundation for Economic Education.
Yeah, and you were there for 2 years, as I recall from your book. But as you were describing, walking on the beach and facing this dilemma, you decided that you had to follow your passion, right? Which hence the title of the book, My Passion for Liberty. And so that started with those essays on liberty by Leonard Read, and then this opportunity you had came up with FEE. Tell us what happened there, and then what spurred the founding of the Future of Freedom Foundation.
Okay, backing up a minute, I should emphasize that the reason that those essays had such a powerful impact on me is that they were all this principled, uncompromising presentation of libertarianism. If I had just read public policy proposals, school vouchers, Social Security privatization, Medicare reform, health savings accounts, reform, if that's all I had read, I wouldn't be a libertarian today. The power of these essays was that they were able to crack through this indoctrination and really free my mind. And that's what really served as the inspiration for me for the rest of my life. That if you want to help other people break through the indoctrination and liberate them, it's got to be done with a totally principled message. A message of reform of the welfare warfare state does not have that power. All it can do is influence people in a reform direction.
If it's okay, I'd like to interrupt there just briefly, because as we were talking offline, our paths align a little bit. And I just want to emphasize this point about this principled case for liberty and how powerful I think that is, because I struggled with this. My path toward libertarianism was very much a roller coaster ride. I would sort of, I attended a public school. I went through the indoctrination phase for years on end. And one of my first introductions to libertarianism was through the Cato Institute and through Reason Magazine, which has some great content, but not always the principled case. A lot of times they take this reform approach, a school choice, health savings accounts. They sometimes advocate for even some foreign intervention, even though it might be minimal compared to what you might find from a conservative publication. But I never really got the fundamental principles of liberty from those sorts of publications. And so I just sort of wandered. In some ways, liberty seemed like it made sense, but I couldn't really formulate the founding principles on my own by reading these other materials. But then when I found the Mises Institute, when I found FEE, and then when I found the Future of Freedom Foundation, those were really sort of the publications that really changed my mind and really solidified the ideas of liberty and got me out of this sort of wandering state from reading all these reform positions. So I think that the point you make there is incredibly important.
Yeah, I agree with you that the reformers in the libertarian movement, they can improve our lives as welfare warfare state serfs. They can make life better, but reform cannot lead to freedom. That's just impossible. And that was one of my disagreements with Milton Friedman that I mentioned earlier. Friedman took the position that school vouchers will lead to the elimination of government involvement in education. So he was arguing that that it was unfair for me to criticize school vouchers because he and I had the same goal. Well, Friedman was wrong. I mean, with all due respect to this Nobel laureate, school vouchers get the state more deeply embedded in the educational process by putting private schools on the dole. But will it improve the educational system? It might. Through this competitive process. Will it help some students? It might. But it's not freedom. That with freedom, you have to dismantle infringements on freedom. And this is what a lot of the reformers just do not realize or they don't appreciate, that in order to achieve freedom, reform is not enough, because reform leaves the infringement on freedom intact. It's like slavery reform. You could reform the lives of the slaves, fewer lashings, better work conditions, better health care, but it's not freedom. They're still slaves. And that's the problem with reform. Reform leaves the infringements on freedom intact, improves our lives, perhaps. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the reforms make things worse, but it's not freedom. And that's the big difference here.
Yeah. I hadn't heard this position until relatively recently about reform with respect to school vouchers, because there are some folks in the liberty movement that are very staunch advocates of school vouchers. But like you say, it still leaves the state hand in the calculus, and it's not truly freedom because the state still has its hand. They still take the money first, and they still dole out the money for whether that's charter schools or vouchers or whatever the system is. And so it's not truly freedom, and it may be an improvement in some circumstances, but it doesn't get the state out of the picture, which is what we really need to have to achieve freedom. So with that said, let's go back.
Let me just add one more thing that is of critical importance here. The central principle in the libertarian philosophy is what, as you know, is called the non-aggression principle. And it says that libertarianism stands for a philosophy where people are free to live their lives any way they want, so long as they do not initiate force or fraud against others. And this principle is so important that that actually the Libertarian Party incorporates it in a written pledge that everybody has to sign as a condition of joining becoming a member of the Libertarian Party. If you refuse to sign it, you don't become a member. And the pledge is that each person vows to never support the initiation of force. Well, to show you the direction the libertarian movement and even the Libertarian Party has taken in the past 20, 30 years, that the vouchers are a central popular position in the libertarian movement and the Libertarian Party. Now, we all know that they're a popular position in the Republican Party and the conservative movement. Those people don't care about initiating force. We do. And that's one of my beefs with the direction that the party and the reformers in the party have made, and in the movement, and the reformers in the movement, is that they are necessarily advocating a program that violates the core principle of our philosophy and violates the pledge that members of the Libertarian Party take. And it sort of has been a lackadaisical type thing now. Oh, well, it doesn't matter. What's the big deal? Well, to me, it matters. Because when you're advocating a program that violates the core principle of your philosophy or a vow that you've taken, I think that that's going to affect your credibility out there among non-libertarians. Is they're going to say, well, how good is your philosophy and how good are your vows if you simply don't honor them? And
Yeah.
I think it's always important to come back to that.
Yeah, that's a great point. And the other side of that, and you hear this a lot in libertarian circles, especially you'll hear people say, "Oh, well, I'm economically conservative, but I'm socially liberal," and that's not what libertarianism is, right? Would you mind to unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, the phrase is really an empty phrase
Yeah.
because libertarianism is really about what should government be doing and not doing. Another one that's similar to that one is I favor smaller government. I mean, you see that's classic Republican conservative uh, talk. That it's a meaningless phrase because if you favor smaller government, then you favor a smaller FDA, a smaller ATF, a smaller DEA, a smaller immigration service, smaller border patrol, but you're keeping all these things intact. You just want to make them smaller. Well, that's not freedom. As I indicated earlier, freedom is identifying what are the infringements on freedom and then dismantling them, removing them. If all you do is end up with a smaller DEA and a smaller drug board, you're still not living in a free society. Your condition might be better because they're not enforcing these things as much as they were before, but it's not freedom. And that's why I think that our job in this movement is to constantly focus on freedom and let the Republicans and the conservatives talk about socially liberal, economically conservative, and smaller government and so forth. I mean, what they're getting at on economically conservative is fiscal responsibility, sound money, and so forth, which are generally good principles, but they don't get to the real heart of what should government be doing in economic affairs. And socially liberal, what they're talking about is civil liberties. And liberals are sometimes not these days, but they used to be pretty good on civil liberties, freedom of speech, and so forth. And so they'd say, well, libertarians are strong on economic liberty and strong on civil liberties. And so this little phrase came into existence. But it really is a meaningless phrase because nobody really knows what it means. It's much better to talk in terms of what should government be doing and what should it not be doing to achieve a free society.
Great. Perfectly said. So let's get back to, if you don't mind, for just a moment, your journey from attorney in Laredo and then Dallas to FEE and then to the Future of Freedom Foundation. I appreciated the story that you included in your book about a civil case that you had that you won, but it didn't really feel like justice. And that was sort of a turning point in your decision or in your thought process about whether you wanted to pursue a career in the law or a career advocating for liberty. Would you mind to talk about that and then talk about your time at FEE and your inspiration for starting the Future Freedom Foundation?
Yeah, well, my last year practicing law, I mean, I was struggling because I loved libertarianism. I was putting on conferences and speaking groups. We had a group in Dallas that I organized called the Mont Dallas Society, which consisted of Austrian economists named after the Mont Pelerin Society. And we would meet every month for discussions on various subjects. And there were actually, 7 or 8 people in our group. And so I was getting a little bit more disillusioned with the law practice. My heart was with libertarianism. So my very last case that I tried before moving on was an example of this, that this shipping company contacted me to represent them in a lawsuit where they had broken this guy's pottery. And the guy was suing them. And it wasn't for a lot of money. I think it was, $10,000, $12,000, something like that. And I said, well, listen, why don't you just pay the guy off? And I said, you're going to pay me a considerable amount of attorney's fees, and I think you're going to lose this case anyway because you have no defense. You broke the guy's pottery. It was being shipped with your company. And the president of the company said to me, this guy has been such a jerk that we don't care how much it costs us. We don't care how much we have to pay you. Just make him earn his money. I said, okay. So I get ready in this case, and I do extensive research as to what the plaintiff has to prove to win this case. And I mean, that's the way I always handled my cases. I learned that the best lawyers are the ones that work hard and get prepared. You may not be the best trial lawyer, but if you're prepared, you can beat the best trial lawyer. So I got prepared, and I was ready when we went into trial, and it was a non-jury case. So the plaintiff puts on his case, and I asked a couple of questions, sort of innocuous questions, but simply just let him do his thing. And at the end of the case, he rests, and I rest. I didn't even put on any witnesses. He closes, I close. We make our summations to the judge, and I said, Judge, he didn't prove all the essential elements of this case. You know, in a civil suit, you have to prove what the law calls all the essential elements to make your case. And I forget what essential element he failed to prove, but he had clearly screwed up. He had just screwed up. He did not prove that. And so the judge says, I want briefs submitted on this issue. And so we both submitted briefs. And so the judge issues a verdict and a judgment in my favor. 0 for the plaintiff, nothing. And so I called my client up, the president of this company. I said, well, we won. And he says, what do you mean we won? I said, we won the case. You don't owe a dime. He just started screaming and yelling. He thought this was you are the greatest lawyer I've ever seen. This is wonderful. We beat this jerk, you know? And so I went home that night, and I had misgivings. I had a hard time sleeping, Alex, because I knew I'd won. And for a trial lawyer, winning is everything. But I also knew that justice had not been done. I mean, justice demanded that this company pay this money. This guy's pottery was broken. And then, you know, I'm over here struggling with what to do with my life. And I said, you know, I can spend my life doing this. It's fun, winning cases and so forth. It's stressful. But I said, I think I want more meaning to my life and than doing this type of thing. And so that's when I said, I'm going to New York and joining FEE. So the first year at FEE was the greatest year of my life. I mean, I cannot begin to tell you how happy I was. It was like being in libertarian heaven, to be working with people that had been inspirations for me. It was just incredible. Everybody hardcore, everybody principled. We'd work together. We'd have lunch together. I was organizing programs. I was their summer seminar director. I organized on the road programs. This is what I was doing as a hobby back in Dallas. And I thought, my God, I'm getting paid. Now, obviously, the pay didn't compare to the law practice, but, you know, I didn't care. It's like I'm doing what I love to do. And it was wonderful. I'd go to work without a suit on, you know, just open collar shirt. And it was just so pleasant. And so then the second year, everything turned south. FEE didn't have a president. And so they brought in a conservative as the president of the organization, and it was just a disaster. It was like mixing oil and water. He didn't like my positions. I would give lectures on, you know, why at the summer seminars that incorporated legalizing drugs and opening the borders and so forth, all the really principled libertarian positions. And he didn't like that at all. And so after a year there, and it appeared that he was going to be there indefinitely, that they later let him go. But I just decided I can't live my life like this. It was just not very happy at all. And so I did some more soul searching, and I said, you know what? I am going to start my own foundation. And so I went and submitted my resignation. I moved out to Denver, Colorado, and I started the Future of Freedom Foundation. And didn't have much money, but struggled really badly the first year, almost went under. And all of a sudden we got a donation unexpectedly for $50,000 after our first year. And from that point on, we've always stayed relatively small, but I've gotten to do everything I wanted to do in life. And that was to present this principled message on liberty. And so, you know, we have some 34 years of articles, conferences, books, essays, all online that present this principled case, which, you know, I would like to think it will be a nice repository for people, you know, generations from now.
Well, I've certainly been a benefactor of your work, and love the newsletter that you put out and the Libertarian Angle that you put out with Richard Ebeling. It's all amazing work, and you can tell that you love the work that you do. And I think you mentioned at one spot in your book that you still, after 34 years, continue to love doing what you do, and can't imagine retiring, and that you still get to work early every day, excited to spread the message of freedom. And so that's an amazing thing. There aren't a whole lot of people that I know that can say that about their life, that they love to get up in the morning and go to work to do something that they find purpose and meaning from doing. So that's an amazing thing. One thing I mentioned Richard Ebeling. I think I'd be remiss if I didn't ask about him. How did you meet, and what is his role with the Future of Freedom Foundation?
Yeah, Richard's our meeting is pretty funny. So when I moved to Dallas, I was starting over again, and other lawyers were referring cases to me, but I didn't have a full caseload by any means for a couple of years there. And so I had a lot of time to spare. And so I was doing a lot of studying of economics from a libertarian perspective. I'd been an economics major, but all I had learned was the Keynesian concepts. And so now I was learning Austrian economics on my own. And so I contacted the head of the economics department at the University of Dallas in Irving, right outside Dallas. And I learned that he was a libertarian and an Austrian economist. His name was Sam Bostaff. And so I said, I wanted to hire him to tutor me in Austrian economics. So we make an appointment, and we strike a deal. I told him I'd pay you for the tutorial. And he says, bring me in your reading list, what you've read. And so I showed him. And so he says, well, before we get to Austrian economics, I think we really need to go back to the basics, real fundamentals. And that's Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations. So we did a chapter by chapter analysis of the entire book, an inquiry into the nature and causes of wealth of nations. Then we went into the classical economists, David Ricardo's principles, some John Stuart Mill, and some of the other classical economists. And then we went into the Austrian school with Karl Menger's Principles of Economics and a little bit of Eugen von Bombewerk. And then we were getting to Ludwig von Mises's Human Action. And Sam says, well, I like making money off you, but in good conscience, I have to turn you over to a guy of your age group that knows more about Austrian economics than anybody in your generation. And he's coming into the department. I've just hired him. His name is Richard Ebeling. So he introduced me to Richard, and I talked to Richard. We struck a tutorial deal. And so Richard and I were meeting just every week on Friday afternoon, where Richard would tutor me chapter by chapter by chapter on human action. And then we'd go have lunch at a Mexican restaurant there. Richard laughs about it now and says this was the greatest deal in his life. He was getting paid to have these conversations with a free lunch. And he and I became fast friends. I mean, we were on the same wavelength on just about every single issue. It was very exciting for me, to find somebody that just was as passionate as I was about libertarianism and was as hardcore as I was. And so after about, I don't know, a year there together, I got offered the job at FEE. He later went to Hillsdale College and became the Ludwig von Mises Professor of Economics. Interestingly enough, after several years there, I don't know, maybe 8 or 9 years there, I'm not sure, he was hired as president of FEE because he had been influenced by FEE as well. And he stayed there 4 or 5 years and is now teaching at the Citadel. And he and I are still very, very close friends. And so he writes a monthly article for me, and we do the Libertarian Angle every week, which is a video show where we take some issue of the day or some economic principle. We just did a series on the classical economists, the ones I just mentioned. And we just have a great time. I mean, we just absolutely enjoy doing the show together. Yeah. So Richard and I, and interestingly enough, our birthdays are 2 days apart. His birthday is today. My birthday was a couple of days ago. And so we always celebrate our birthdays at about the same time.
That's awesome. And it comes through in the show in the libertarian angle that you two have a great working relationship, and I'm sure that stems from this, years of, working together, and stems back to ultimately reaches back to those days when, he was tutoring you in economics. So that definitely comes through in the show. So I really enjoy those. It's interesting too that I didn't realize the connection to fee. Fee is a sort of a common theme here, which I don't know if you mentioned it earlier. If you did, I apologize. But fee, of course, was founded right by Leonard Read, who also wrote the essays on liberty that you found in that Laredo Public Library. So Leonard Read, I think it's safe to say, like you said, that he's influenced untold numbers of people, which is another point that I'd like you to talk about. You mentioned that you were doing seminars, and you talk in the book about one where I think it was for fee in Minnesota, where I think 18 people showed up, and you were disappointed by the number of people that showed up because you'd had better attendance at other events. But then the response that you got was that that's not how you measure success. You don't know, you don't understand who you might influence on any given day. Do you mind to tell that story, and then we'll get into the meat of a few more specific topics like immigration, foreign policy, the drug war, etc.
Yeah, that Leonard Read is a fascinating guy because he's one of the least well-known giants in the libertarian movement. I mean, people know about Mises and Hayek and Friedman, but the number of people that were influenced by Leonard Read is immeasurable. There's so many libertarians will say Leonard Read, and his books had a profound impact on me. I would recommend all of his books to this day. They're so clear, they're so succinct, and you feel like he's talking only to you. And his style of writing was absolutely incredible.
Well, and who could explain the power of the free market better, right, than his book I Pencil?
Right? Exactly. Yeah. I mean, marvelous essay on the biography of a pencil.
Right.
And but all his books were just amazing. Just the guy, I think, is one of the most profound thinkers ever in the libertarian movement. And I'd highly recommend people to search out his books and his essays. And the reason I also raise that is that, remember, these 4 books that I discovered, Essays on Liberty, were not just his essays. It was a collection of essays, and his essays were included in these books. And these 4 volumes, it was actually a 10-set volume. I only saw 4 there in the public library in Laredo, but they were published in the 50s, and I discovered them in the late 70s. So the reason that's so important is that I'm sure when Leonard Read was asked in the 50s by, say, Fee's Board of Trustees, how are your books doing, Leonard? Are they selling and so forth? Well, Leonard Read could not have said, they're doing very well because they're going to influence this young lawyer 25 years from now, because he obviously wouldn't have known that. But it showed me the importance of putting these sound ideas into the marketplace, even though you don't know what their impact's going to be. It's like a Johnny Appleseed. You just plant the seeds and you move on. You don't worry about the results. Well, so when I get to Fee and I'm organizing these on-the-road seminars, we called them supper seminars. That was the name I came up. Let's do supper seminars, where we'd go into different cities and invite people on our mailing list to come and bring friends. We'd have supper. I'd give the before dinner talk, and Bob Anderson, who was vice president there at Fee, he would give the after dinner talk. So we'd usually draw about, around 100 people. But in Minneapolis, it was 18 people, and a really small crowd. And the expenses are pretty much the same. You got flights and hotels, and I'd say it probably cost us about $1,000 there, but a considerable amount of money back then. And so we're flying back, and I said, Bob, I'm really sorry about this one, man. I just spent a lot of money by the foundation, and we only had 18 people. And he says, to heck with it. You don't know. We can't predict that. We don't know how many we're going to get. Put it behind you, Well, several years later, I'm not really sure how many, about 15 years later, maybe, Ron Paul has returned to Congress. He's been reelected to Congress from Lake Jackson, Texas, and he invites me to his swearing in, to the little party that he had in his office. And so I go to this party and celebrating his return to Congress, and I'm mixing with people there, and two guys come up to me and introduce themselves. And they're young guys. And they said, the reason that we're doing what we're doing, we're working for Ron Paul here in his office. And the reason we're doing what we're doing is we attended a seminar that you put on in Minneapolis many years ago. I was blown away.
Yeah.
I just was blown away because it shows you the unforeseen consequences of you just put on a good show and you make your principal case and you don't worry about the outcome.
That's awesome. I love that story. That was one of my favorite stories from your book because, like you say, you don't know what dividends your efforts will pay down the road. Much like Leonard Read didn't know what dividends his efforts would pay. So that's amazing. All right, so let's jump into a few, and obviously we can't talk about all of the topics that you cover in your book, but I'd like to touch on a few, including immigration, foreign policy, and the drug war. And if we have time for any others, we may discuss a few others. But I know you're an advocate for open immigration, and not all libertarians or people who call themselves libertarians are advocates for open immigration. I'd like to get your thoughts on that. And then I'm going to pose to you, and I mentioned this to you briefly off air, an argument that I heard from Milton Friedman that I'd like you to address as well. So before I do that, though, just if you would, state the case for open immigration.
Okay. As I indicated earlier, I grew up on the border. I spent almost half my life there. And so I've seen this issue firsthand. And I've seen the perpetual crisis. You see all these paroxysms of anxiety right now, people pacing the floor and all this stuff over the immigration crisis. People forget that this is not a new crisis. It's a continuous crisis. It's a perpetual crisis. When I was a kid, they were talking about the immigration crisis. When I got back to Laredo, there was an immigration crisis. In fact, when I got back to Laredo to practice law, among the very first things I did is I made an appointment with the local federal judge, and went in there. I'd known the guy before he was a judge because my dad has been a lawyer. They'd practiced law there in Laredo, and so I knew this guy. And I said, Judge O'Connor, I would like you to appoint me to represent illegal immigrants, and I'll do it for free because I think this system is so unconstitutional in the way it's being handled that I want to take this up to the Fifth Circuit. And he says, done. And he started pointing me to cases. And so, there I am representing these guys on a pro bono basis with the intention of taking it up on appeal, this whole crooked and corrupt system. The thing that, and it is kind of regrettable that so many libertarians have gone off and abandoned this particular libertarian position. And it is the libertarian position. There's people in the movement and the Libertarian Party that have tried to say that there's two positions on libertarianism, which is pure nonsense, because libertarianism is an internally consistent philosophy. It does not embrace contradictions. And that's one of the most attractive features of it. So either one is the right position or the other. And of course, they say this massive system of immigration controls and the immigration police state that comes with it, and the death and the suffering and the rapes is really the true, genuine libertarian principle, which is ridiculous. I mean, if I knew that my philosophy was one of death, suffering, rapes, and a police state and a massive socialist structure, I would not be in this philosophy. And we know that open borders is the genuine position because of the non-aggression principle. When you cross a border, you are not aggressing against anybody. You're just crossing the border. Like, for example, this last week, I was in Georgia. I drove to Georgia. And every time I crossed the border into North Carolina, South Carolina, and into Georgia, I never was initiating force against anybody. And there were no border guards stopping me. So as soon as I crossed this imaginary line, and there was no red line between that delineated the border. All you do is see a sign, welcome to North Carolina, and you know you've crossed the border. So that's how you know that open borders is the legitimate libertarian position, because it's consistent with the libertarian non-aggression principle. If somebody puts a border guard there and stops me, he's the one initiating force against me. But here you have this crisis, Alex, that's gone on to perpetuity. It's a perpetual crisis. And what the advocates of immigration controls do not realize, and I think a lot of them do not want to realize this, is that the crisis is rooted in the system. In other words, the system of immigration controls produces its own crisis. It's much like the drug war. The drug war produces a crisis, like cartels and violence and people dying of overdoses and so forth. Well, and so people crack down in the war on drugs to try to resolve the crisis, and the crisis just gets worse and worse and worse, when the only solution is to get rid of the system, the drug laws, the drug war, and then the crisis goes away. Well, it's the same with immigration. This is what is called central planning. The entire concept is a socialist principle called central planning. Central planning is when the government manages and controls peaceful economic activity. And here it's planning the movements of countless people, hundreds of millions of people in a very complex labor market or tourist market or investment market. It simply cannot be done. Ludwig von Mises called the results of central planning planned chaos. I mean, you couldn't come up with a better term for what's going on the border than planned chaos. Well, to enforce their system, with their central planning, they say, okay, this is the total number of immigrants we're going to let in. They study the economic conditions, how many farmers need workers on the farms, how many industries need people. They issue visas for all this. They allocate numbers to each country, credentials for each country. It's the classic mindset of the central planner. It's what Friedrich Hayek called the fatal conceit of the planner, that he thinks he could plan out something enormously complex that would happen spontaneously in a free market.
That somehow that person has more knowledge than the collective knowledge of all the individuals' decentralized knowledge put together, right? I mean,
exactly. Yeah, because in a free market, you're relying on each person to plan his own affairs, and he has what Hayek called the special knowledge of time and circumstances as far as his own particular situation. If a farmer all of a sudden needs a field of strawberries that need to be harvested, he knows that immediately. So he zooms up his price and word spreads, hey, this guy's paying $50 an hour or whatever. And that's a signal. The workers come over. The central planner cannot do that. He can't know instantaneously what everybody's values are. So that's the beauty of a free market, is that all this knowledge is decentralized and being used by each person in his own time and circumstances. The central planner can't do that. I don't care how powerful his computers are, because everything's changing constantly, people's valuations. So you end up with this crisis, this huge backlog of people at the border. And so there's the beginning of the crisis. Now everybody starts getting upset because the system's not working. But instead of recognizing that the system is causing the crisis, they double down and they say, we need a police state. And so they get highway checkpoints. They get a massive border patrol checkpoint to stop all these people from circumventing the control, the central planner's control, who are just responding to market signals. Most of people just want to come here and work and get wealthy, and employers love immigrants. That's why they're up here, because they get hired. But you get this massive police state, which the proponents of immigration controls, who are libertarians, never talk about, but because it's uncomfortable for them to be defending a police state. You've got warrantless searches of farms and ranches within 100 miles of the border. Get that? It wasn't just on our farm on the Rio Grande. They can search farms and ranches within 100 miles of the border without a warrant. Try reconciling that with the Fourth Amendment. They have highway checkpoints, not just leaving Laredo going north, east-west highways. They stop people who have never gone into Mexico. This is how Willie Nelson got caught with marijuana, one of these highway checkpoints. They have these in communist countries. They have Border Patrol boarding Greyhound buses and demanding people's papers. And a lot of this is directed to Mexican Americans. Laredo was about 98% Mexican American when I was there. I mean, this was a city that had been part of Mexico before the U.S. government, absorbed it. And so it's not surprising that the population is predominantly Mexican American. They're the ones who are targeted. The Anglos, and when they go to these checkpoints, they just get right through. And so then they criminalize each time their police state wouldn't work. They add new things. They criminalize the hiring of illegal immigrants, the transportation of illegal immigrants, the harboring, the taking care of them. They ultimately end up with this Berlin Wall down there. Nothing works. I mean, that's why I find this whole thing sometimes it's tragic, but it's also amusing because no matter what they do, it never works. Yeah. And they cannot conceive that the reason that it doesn't work is because their system is inherently defective. But sometimes I can't help but laugh every time they enact a new reform, like this guy Abbott in Texas, putting concertina wire in the water, hoping to cut up migrants that are swimming across the river. I mean, this is horrific. But he honestly thinks this is going to work. This is going to finally, after 80, 90 years, going to get rid of the crisis. It's not going to do it. There's only one solution, and I've said this for 34 years at FFF. There's only one solution to this crisis and to the police state and the death and suffering. Get rid of it all. Get rid of the system, just like drug laws. Legalize it all. Free movements of goods, services, and people across borders. At that moment, let's say you did that today. Tomorrow, there would be no crisis. Nobody would be pacing the floors. Nobody would be talking about it. There just would be no crisis. There's no more police state because now people just come and go, crossing across the border. You'd be interacting with people. You would know whether they were a Mexican citizen or an American citizen. You wouldn't care. I mean, do you care today? You walk into McDonald's, you hear people speaking Spanish back in the back. Do you say, I wonder if they're American citizens, if they're here legally, I better go check. Right. You don't care. And that's what would happen with open borders. Immediately, the crisis would disappear. It's the only solution. And I feel like I've been banging my head for 34 years, but there is no other solution. And finally, when people come to that realization, Alex, that there is no other solution, that's when we'll see a shift in society. But they have to finally come to the realization that no matter what they do with their police state down there, it ain't going to work.
I'm glad you alluded to the parallels between immigration and the drug war, because there are lots of parallels. For instance, it's a government created crisis, like you mentioned, and the more that they fail, the more they crack down and add to the layers of bureaucracy and the police state to try to fix the problem they created in the first place. And of course, it never works. And much like the drug war, they do the same thing. The more they fail at it, the more they ratchet down and try to do it even harder. Okay, try to do all their failed policies even more. And so there are certainly lots of parallels in that regard. But before we move on to the drug war, I'd like you to address this argument that I heard from Milton Friedman. It's a short clip that I saw on YouTube, and if I can find the clip again, I'll link to it in the show notes. But the argument basically goes like this: prior to 1914, we had basically an open immigration system. Anybody could come or go as they wished. 1914, World War I begins, and not just the United States, lots of countries around the world start to reconsider their immigration policies and begin to clamp down on the free flow of people across borders. And in the meantime, the United States starts to develop this welfare state. And so what Milton Friedman says, and you hear lots of people make this point, is that, okay, I'm all for open immigration, except that we have welfare and they come here to get welfare. So what Milton Friedman says is that illegal immigration is good because it's illegal, because if people come here illegally, they won't qualify for welfare. So essentially the argument is we have to get rid of the welfare system before we can open up our borders. And I have my thoughts about that, but I want to hear what's your response to that.
Yeah, the notion is, and it's never put this way, but really this is what they're saying. When they say that you can't have open borders with a welfare state, what Friedman and other anti-open borders people are really saying is that if you have open borders, it will result in the payment of higher taxes. Now, they don't put it like that, but that's what they're really saying, is that they're going to come and get on welfare, which is funded by taxation, And therefore, this will result in higher taxes having to be paid by the American people. That's the essence of the argument. You open the borders equals higher taxes. Now, my hunch is that for a lot of, especially conservatives, this is just an excuse. The welfare state argument, that even if you didn't have a welfare state, I think a lot of them would still say, we do not want open borders. But the welfare state argument provides a little excuse for them to take that position.
Well, the next excuse, right, would be the drug war. We can't let people come across the border because then they'll bring in drugs.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And of course, our position is legalize drugs and you don't have the
Right.
problem anymore. Leave people free to bring in whatever they want. In fact, your point about comparing the drug war is an interesting one because, libertarians are fairly unanimous on the need to legalize drugs. A lot of them want to limit it to marijuana. My position is legalize all drugs. I mean, get rid of the black market and everything. Make it a legitimate market. But we know almost as a virtual certainty that if you legalize drugs, there's a lot of addicts that are going to go get treatment. Right now it's difficult to get treatment for many of them because, you can get busted if you go into an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting and talk about your drug addiction. There could be a narc in there. And so people are reticent about seeking treatment under drug laws. Well, if you legalize drugs, it's a virtual certainty that many of these addicts are going to get treatment, and they're going to get treatment with Medicaid because Medicaid is, free medical care for the poor. That means higher taxes. So does that mean that we libertarians should support the drug war until Medicaid is abolished? That would be the same analogy with respect to immigration. That should we wait to call for open borders until the welfare state's dismantled? Well, that means that with the drug war, we're going to have this spectacle of where libertarians are supporting the drug war because it could be Medicaid will never be abolished. Now, imagine that as a spectacle. Democrats and Republicans would love that. Whenever people are engaged in wrongdoing, they love it for people to be joining them. They would love for libertarians to now start supporting the drug war. My position is you have to stand with your principles regardless of the cost. Drug legalization is a core libertarian principle, and that we cannot ever surrender that principle because it's going to result in the payment of higher taxes. It's the same with open borders, that given that this is the legitimate libertarian position, we can never abandon our principles simply because it means the payment of higher taxes. Let's assume that I got to pay $3,000 a year in extra taxes because of additional welfare. I will pay the taxes, but I will continue to maintain the principle of open borders. Because as soon as you abandon that principle, what you're really doing is you're blocking out everybody from coming to this country who would not get on welfare. And then you've got this giant apparatus, this socialist apparatus, and that's a very costly apparatus too. That more taxes there. Now, there's another factor to consider, and I never get into studies, but I know that there's studies out there that say that immigrants are a net plus. I also know, I don't know what all the rules and regulations are, but from what I understand, immigrants are not permitted to go on welfare for at least 3 years or so. And the reason this is important is that what we ought to do as libertarians is just keep focusing on the wrongdoing, the welfare state, get that dismantled for everybody, but don't join them by advocating a violation of our own principles. Now, having said all this, my experience is, and growing up on the border, that 99% of immigrants do not come to get on welfare because the type of person that goes on welfare is generally a psychologically weak person. Immigrants generally are not weak people. I mean, it takes a lot of intestinal fortitude to leave a country, to leave your family, to leave your culture, your language, your friends, your relatives, and to come to a country where you get insulted and abused and so forth. It is not an easy process. The person that is welfare state oriented is not going to want to go through that process. It's too difficult. So most people that come here are coming to get wealthy. They're coming to get rich. You don't get rich on welfare. And they're thinking, I can start a business, or I can go work, and then I can make a lot of money and go back to Mexico in my little village, and I'll have a lot of money. And so this welfare state argument, for me, is a canard. It's really not valid, because most people come to work to improve their lives. So all in all, I would say that libertarians should never abandon their principles for any reason whatsoever. If it results in the payment of higher taxes, and I seriously doubt it does, but if it does, so be it. Pay the taxes, but never, ever abandon your principles. And at the same time, focus your attention on getting rid of the welfare state rather than abandoning your principles.
Right. Yeah. And I know, and most people I know listening won't take it this way, but of course you're not advocating for higher taxes. If in fact that is a consequence of opening the borders for a short period of time, that may be a tolerable consequence. But number one, I don't think it's likely to go up, because you're going to dismantle, as you say, the police state that's developed around immigration enforcement. And number two, you're still going to focus on dismantling the welfare system. So our goal is to eliminate taxes, right? And to get rid of aggression wherever there is aggression, right? And taxes are enforced, of course, at the point of a gun, ultimately. It's the common saying that taxation is theft. That lots of libertarians promote and advocate that idea. So, of course, you're not advocating for higher taxes, but it may be a consequence, but a tolerable one, at least in the short term. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. I mean, I would never support any initiation of force, which is what taxation is. I'm just saying that if the price of adhering to your principles is higher taxes, then it's a price worth paying, as compared to not paying the price and abandoning your principles. I mean, there have been people that have sacrificed a lot for freedom in history. And to say, well, I don't want to sacrifice some of my money here, and so I'm going to abandon my principles, to me is not a good position to take. And not to mention the fact that, immigrants bring a vitality to your society, that an energy that they can infuse a society that's sort of stagnant or whatever with this unbounded energy that produces prosperity that, of course, enriches the state with higher taxes and so forth, which I don't like. But obviously, a prosperous society is a society where the state is going to have more revenues through taxation. There's another factor to consider, and that's Social Security. That what ends up happening with Social Security, and a lot of supporters of Social Security starting to recognize this, these immigrants come in and are paying Social Security taxes. With their employers that have to withhold from them. And so they're buttressing the Social Security system, which I totally oppose, of course. I would repeal all these socialist programs. But a lot of these immigrants then return to their home countries and never draw on Social Security. So it's sort of a transfer program from the poor to the elderly. And some people are starting to recognize this and saying, maybe we ought to let more immigrants in to buttress the Social Security system. I would never use that as an argument, but I think it's kind of amusing to point it out.
One thing I want to point out before we move on to the war on drugs, which we've already alluded to, in your chapter about open immigration, and you've talked about this a little bit already, but I want to highlight a portion of your book here where you say, what proponents of immigration controls often forget or ignore is that there is a high price that comes with this type of socialist system. That price is an immigration police state, which is the opposite of a free society. And this is the part I want to point out, because I think this is highly impactful and people forget about it, especially people who don't live close to the border, don't live within 100 miles of the border, especially. But you point out the cost here is that there are highway checkpoints that subject American citizens who have never left the country to the possibility of full searches of their vehicles and their person, that there are roving border patrol checkpoints, that there are warrantless searches of farms and ranches and other property within 100 miles of the border, that there are full searches of body cavities of Americans returning from overseas vacations or business trips, that people who are boarding Greyhound buses are required to to show their papers that there are violent raids on privately owned American businesses and property, that it encourages a system where there are private snitches, where you don't know who may or may not be trying to rat you out to the government, and a system where there's criminalization of Americans who hire, transport, or harbor illegal immigrants, and you go on. The list goes on. But I think that those costs are often the costs that a lot of people don't see, and it's a huge cost, and especially a huge cost not only in tax dollars but in freedom. So I think that's a huge thing. Not only are people, libertarians especially, compromising on principle when they advocate for these immigration controls, they're compromising on cost and principle in other areas, as in the right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures, for instance.
Absolutely. I mean, what you've just said is a very eloquent presentation. And this is what so many libertarians forget, that when they support the system of immigration controls, they are at the very same time supporting a police state. And a police state is the opposite of freedom. That's another way that we know that this is not a libertarian position, because there is no way to reconcile libertarianism with a police state. And obviously, libertarians recognize that, who support immigration controls, because they never mention it. They don't deal with the police state because it's uncomfortable for them. But it's like thunder and lightning. You know, you can't say, "Oh, Jacob, I love lightning, but I oppose thunder," because thunder comes with lightning, and a police state comes with this system of border controls. If you support America's system of immigration controls, you may not mention it, but you're also supporting at the same time a very, very nasty police state that not only destroys civil liberties, but also brings death. You see, when you see a program bringing death and suffering and rapes and kidnappings and things like that, that's a 100% conclusive sign that that's not a libertarian position, because libertarianism is not a system like that. And but that's what people don't like to talk about, that support immigration controls, that they're also supporting a police state and a system that brings death, suffering, and misery for innocent people.
Now, there's one other, we could go on about immigration for several hours, no doubt. I've seen some split amongst libertarians on this issue about sort of federalism and what rights the state of Texas has vis-a-vis, or powers rather, the state of Texas has vis-a-vis the federal government. So there's some tension here, because lots of people, I think, are sympathetic to Texas in insofar as they are fighting back against the federal government. But by the same token, they're compromising their principle, at least as libertarians, on open borders. So here, I think it's sort of a structural, there's this tension between some people's view on government and what powers the states should have versus the federal government. But then whether or not they agree with Texas's actions is another question. So I think that's an interesting argument as well. Do you have any thoughts? Does that make sense? Or do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, but my feeling is that 99.9% of the people that are supporting Governor Abbott's actions there in Texas, including putting this concertina wire that is cutting up and possibly even killing migrants, is that they are all supporters of immigration controls. Now, as you point out, that's not necessarily true. You can be supporting Abbott on federalism grounds, but my hunch is that 99% of the people that are defending him are defending what he's doing, or his power to do what he's doing. And it's long been established in the law that if the federal government exercises power in a certain area, that preempts any state from getting involved. And this is the reason why the Supreme Court issued its order authorizing federal officials to go down and tear down that concertina wire. And Ebba's playing a really dangerous game here. I think his bluff's going to be called. I think he's going to back down, because the only recourse here is violence, and that principle is going to be pretty nasty if Biden decides to enforce the Supreme Court's order, which he has a duty to do. And the only way that he can really enforce it, because you got state officials that are not letting federal officials go in there and tear down this concertina wire pursuant to the Supreme Court's order, Biden may have to resort to troops. And if Abbott, I doubt real seriously whether Abbott's going to order the Highway Patrol or Texas Rangers to fire on U.S. troops. But if he does, I don't think there's any doubt of the outcome of this thing. And so we live in a system where the Supreme Court makes the final ruling. I mean, that is our system. They may make a wrong ruling or whatever, but the system we live under, they're the final arbiters. And now, having said that, the immigration control advocates are saying that a state has the right. States don't have rights, but that's what they're saying. The state has a right to control its borders. Well, if that's true, then Texas would have the right to control its northern border too, and its eastern border and western border. And there's actually libertarians who call for that. We have the biggest open border region in the entire world in history, where people can cross state lines without encountering border guards. But why shouldn't Texas be able to have border checkpoints in its border with Oklahoma or its border with Arkansas, New Mexico, or whatever? Why not control all the borders? Well, because we also have the idea of fundamental rights that Jefferson talked about this in the Declaration of Independence, and proponents of immigration controls hate this part of the Declaration of Independence, absolutely hate it, that the pursuit of happiness is a fundamental right. It's a natural right, a God-given right. It doesn't just adhere to Americans, it adheres to everybody. That was the universal nature of the Declaration of Independence. And pursuit of happiness means crossing borders, moving to new areas of the world. And so no state has a legitimate authority to interfere with this. And especially when you got a 14th Amendment. Now, the proponents of immigration controls always mention the 10th Amendment, states' rights. You see, that was their big thing, state sovereignty. Well, the 14th Amendment was enacted after the 10th Amendment, and that says no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. When you're interfering with people's fundamental rights, you're interfering with their liberty. And that goes back to whether people have a right to move, to seek a better life, to pursue happiness. And I say they do. This is a fundamental liberty position. And so even if the federal government weren't regulating immigration, and the Constitution, by the way, does not provide any authority for the federal government to regulate immigration. There is no provision that gives them that power. They've abrogated the power, but it's totally illegitimate. But that doesn't mean that the states have the authority to do this, either under fundamental principles of liberty, but especially also under the 14th Amendment.
Well, and one thing that complicates the situation in my mind, a lot like the welfare argument, is the existence of public property, right? Because open immigration doesn't mean that you advocate for trespass, for instance, onto someone's private property. But a lot of immigration occurs over public property, right? Over property that's owned by the federal government or over property that's owned by the state of Texas. And that's part of the issue, as I understand it, down at Eagle Pass is who has authority over what property? Is it the state or the federal government? But where there's private property, people can exclude whoever they want, right? And the immigration problem takes care of itself. So do you have any thoughts on that particular point?
Yeah. That you do have trespasses onto private ranches and farms. I told you I grew up on a farm on the Rio Grande that was outside Laredo, and periodically we'd have illegal immigrants swimming across the Rio Grande and crossing our farm, and they're trespassing. I would never defend such a thing, a trespass. But what people do not recognize is that the reason they're doing this is because of the system of immigration controls. The reason they're crossing over here is because it's illegal to cross at the regular crossing point, which is the international bridge. Now, we live in a country that is based primarily on private property. Now, we know that the government owns public parks like Big Bend or Yellowstone National Park or whatever, but primarily and basically, fundamentally, we are a nation that's based on the principle of private property, private homes, private businesses. All right. But connecting all these things, facilitating people to go from private residence to private business, or just to facilitate them traveling to all these private deals, the government has the road business. Now, there's also trains and there's airplanes as well, but we'll stick with the roads here. And the general principle is that everybody is free to use the roads to get from point A to point B. The government owns the roads. That's public property. And I use public in the sense that it's government owned. All the bridges are government owned. They're either owned by the state or they're owned by the federal government. So like when I travel to Georgia, I'm traveling on a government road to go from my home, a private residence, over to a hotel, which is a privately owned facility. I'm using the government's means of transport. So we don't want the government to be discriminating on the use of its resources, the roads. We don't want the government to be discriminating on the basis of race. I mean, imagine if the government said no blacks will be able to use the roads. It'd be inane. It'd be horrific. And you probably would see a revolution. So we don't want the government to be discriminating on the use of roads on race, color, sexual orientation, or national origin. If you're a foreigner, you are free to use the roads as much as anybody else. Now, obviously, you're paying taxes, you're buying gasoline, and so forth. So when people cross bridges, like there's a bridge between Virginia and Maryland crossing the Potomac, they're using a government bridge, a government-owned bridge. But anybody can cross that bridge. There's no checkpoint at the bridge between Virginia and Maryland. It's the same principle at the International Bridge in Laredo. This is a government-owned bridge. And so when people are crossing that bridge and then proceeding on northward on the government-owned highway, they're just using the government facility to go from point A to point B. They're in no different position than an American citizen. They're just using the government facility. And if roads were private, which obviously would be fantastic, there is virtually no doubt that the owners of the private roads would also let foreigners use the roads because you make money that way. In fact, I've felt that probably under a system of private roads, it would be the businesses that would own the roads. They would get a gigantic consortium of Walmart, and Target, Giant Food, and everybody would pitch in to buy these roads and would provide them free in order to get people to go into the stores. That's the way people get into the stores.
Yeah.
So, stores don't discriminate against immigrants. Private residences don't discriminate against residents. And so why would the owner of roads? Now, let me make one final point. People have a right to exclude whoever they want from their own home and their own business on whatever reason they want. That freedom of association is an essential part of a free society. So I defend that right. Somebody says, I hate migrants, I hate Mexicans, I hate Guatemalans, I don't want them in my home. Great. You have a right to exclude them, or from your business if that's what you want to do. I think you'd go out of business fairly soon because I think people would ostracize you for being bigoted. But nobody has the right to prevent me from associating with whom I want. So if I want a Mexican in my house and I want to rent my house to him or rent a room, it's my right. Or if I want to sell stuff to him in my business, that's my right. And nobody has a right to interfere with my decisions on freedom of association. So that now it complicates things when you've got Big Bend National Park, the government owns it, but those complications always arise with government-owned property. What we don't want is the government discriminating against people on any arbitrary grounds in the use of that property.
Before we close up, I'd like to share I love the way you sum up the section of your book on open immigration. I'd like just to read this short paragraph at the very end of the chapter. I think it's pretty effective. It says, all of these police state measures are characteristic of a totalitarian system, not a free society. They are also contrary to God's second greatest commandment, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. They have been accompanied by a massive toll in terms of death, suffering, misery, impoverishment, and destruction of liberty and privacy. There is but one solution to all this immigration mayhem: liberty, genuine liberty, which comes in the form of libertarian idea of open borders. So I love the way that you close that chapter there. So if it's okay with you, Jacob, we'll move on. I don't want to. I've had you on for over an hour now. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I'd like to address one more topic. And I'd like to talk about the war on drugs, which we've alluded to a little bit. We won't get to foreign policy, which I'd hope to talk about. So let's talk about the war on drugs just briefly, and then your candidacy for Libertarian candidate for president to close up. Does that sound okay to you?
That sounds perfect.
All right, excellent. Well, we've alluded to the war on drugs throughout our discussion of the immigration issue, and much like immigration, there are untold consequences, unforeseen consequences, as some might say, from government intervention. And you said before that, by making drugs illegal, you create a black market, you drive people to the black market, which is inherently violent. And the drugs are more potent, kill people from overdosing. As a matter of fact, you talk about this in the book. You wouldn't call it an overdose because it's not intentional, right? It's an unintentional because of the way that the drugs are made. There's no way to know if they're safe or what's contained in them. But if you would, with that sort of background and state the libertarian position against the war on drugs.
All right. Well, we begin with the freedom position, or what's called a moral position. And that is, freedom entails necessarily the right to ingest whatever you want to ingest. I don't care how harmful, how dangerous, how destructive. You have a right to ingest whatever you want to ingest. And this is why the drug laws are so horrific, because they really do turn the citizenry into little children, little serfs, where the government daddy is sending them to their room like a little child. The room happens to be in a state or federal penitentiary for putting bad things into their mouths. And people have come to accept this, Alex, but it is a direct violation of a free society. If the government's putting you in jail for putting bad things in your mouth, you're not living in a free society. And this was when I first opened up the show and said this revelation that on my road to Damascus experience, I realized I don't live in a free society. This is a classic example. And then there's the utilitarian case for eliminating the drug war. That's the moral case or the freedom case. But the utilitarian case is, this thing has not only not worked. I mean, we've had it for generations now. It clearly has not worked, and things are worse than ever. You have gang wars and so forth, but they produce. Well, I mean, they don't work in the sense that people are still taking drugs in monumental amounts, and that was the purpose of the drug laws, to stop people from taking drugs or to deter people from taking drugs. Manifest failure. Everybody would agree with that, without exception. But it's also produced horrific negative consequences. If it was neutral in its consequences, that would be one thing. But the rise of the drug cartels, the gang wars, the turf battles, the violent turf battles, the deaths that you alluded to, they call them overdoses, but a large number of them are really corrupted drugs. Because in a black market, the seller doesn't care whether he's selling corrupted drugs or not. He can't get sued. In a legitimate market, a pharmacy does care. He sells a drug that kills a customer, he's going to get sued, possibly for everything, sending him into bankruptcy. But even then, he loses all his customers. So he has the incentive to produce high-quality drugs to addicts. In a black market, that incentive doesn't exist. So you have these, not to mention the horrific violation of civil liberties. I mean, the DEA, warrantless searches, bashing down people's door. One of the most powerful arguments for me for ending the drug war is the racial consequences. I mean, people say, there's not institutionalized racism in America. I totally disagree with that. To me, the war on drugs is the most racially bigoted government program since segregation, maybe even more so, because it's enforced against everybody, but let's face it, the white kids that come from rich, influential families get preferential treatment, generally speaking. This war has disproportionately fallen on black people. I'm not saying that every drug cop, DEA agents, or federal judge or state judge is a racial bigot, but I'm saying some of them are. And this drug war is a dream come true for the bigot in the criminal justice system, because the judge can mete out a horrific sentence, 50 years of your life for marijuana distribution or something, and say, oh no, I'm just enforcing the war on drugs to some black guy, and then mete out, a 5-year probated sentence to some white guy, and he doesn't have to justify it or anything. So everything argues for ending this thing, just totally ending it. Some libertarians settle for marijuana legalization, not me. It's got to be ended entirely all across the country. It has been a worse disaster than alcohol prohibition. I mean, we saw what that did, but we haven't learned from it. That's what's so bizarre to me. People know that all the violence, the Al Capone and all that stuff, the civil liberties violations evaporated on the day that alcohol was legalized. The same thing would happen with drug legalization. The cartels would evaporate, the crisis would evaporate, the turf battles, the gang wars. Would you still have addiction? Of course. I mean, you always have addiction in drugs. Drugs go back a millennium. But at least drug addicts could then seek treatment openly and confess their problem without being busted by some narc for seeking treatment. So everything argues. I think this program's teetering. I really do. I think that it could go very quickly and very suddenly because of the movement. People are starting to recognize this now.
Well, there are enough states that are moving toward the direction of at least decriminalization, although legalization would be far better. The problem with decriminalization, and I've seen this, at least my perspective, in Oregon, they've gotten lots of criticism in Oregon, saying, of course, the proponents of the drug war, that overdose deaths have skyrocketed since they've softened their stance on the war on drugs. But part of the problem as I see it, is that they decriminalized the drugs, which means that most people are still getting penalized or punished, and so there's still a black market for the product, for whatever the drug happens to be, which creates so you still have the dangerous product on the market without legalization. So I think that states some of them are starting to take a step in the right direction, many with marijuana, some with harder drugs. But I think that they got to go. They're not going to see the results that they want to see unless they commit to legalization. So that's my perspective anyway.
I completely agree with you. I mean, decriminalization leaves it a criminal offense. It may be a lighter criminal offense, but again, it goes to the moral case. People have a right to ingest whatever they want, and they may die from it. But that's part of living in a free society. I mean, people do skydiving, they climb mountains, they go on hikes in the middle of winter, and sometimes they die. This is the price of a free society where people are making dangerous choices the rest of us may not approve of. And I'd be the last one to condone any kind of drug use. But ultimately, a person's got to figure this out for himself, Alex. You can't have the state be putting people in jail and thinking that's going to reform people, because it never works.
Yeah. Well, and much like we were talking about earlier, the parallels between the immigration debate and the war on drugs, it's naive to think that the government could ever stop people from using drugs, just like it's naive to think that the government could ever stop people from moving across borders. They can't do it. They can't keep drugs out of jails, just like they can't keep people from moving across borders. And all you get are these untold negative consequences, huge expense, and you compromise the principle of non-aggression and build up a huge police state. So it's a lose-lose-lose situation on both fronts.
I think it's worth pointing out there are some winners. The drug cartels are winners in the drug war. They're making a lot of money. Huge amounts of money. The worst thing that could ever happen to the drug cartels is legalization, because they'd be out of business overnight, instantaneously.
And the police state.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was going to say, that the other winners are the federal judges, the state judges, the DEA agents, the deputy sheriffs, the sheriffs, all the people involved, the clerk, the court clerks. They're all getting these generous salaries to enforce this thing, not to mention the bribes. There's a considerable number of them taking bribes. But they have mortgages. A judge has a mortgage just like anybody else. He's got a family to raise. So they're resistant to legalization because they'd be put out of work. I mean, those federal judges, a lot of them in the Texas and along the border would be twiddling their thumbs if there were no more immigration cases and drug cases. And they know that. So those are the two winners: the drug war and the immigration war bureaucracy, and the drug cartels and the immigration cartels.
One last comment I'd like to make on the war on drugs before we move on to your discussion about your candidacy for presidency. I'm an attorney. I do lots of criminal defense work, so I see the war on drugs just about every day. And one thing that I've noticed, you mentioned the racial aspect to it. I haven't seen that component extensively in my experience, and that may be based on primarily where I practice, the region I'm in, Southern Indiana. But what I have seen, and it's along a similar vein, and you alluded to this as well, is the rich versus poor, because the police, oftentimes the incentives are such that they want an easy target. They want to get the low-hanging fruit, somebody who can't afford their own attorney, somebody who can't afford to pay the best litigation, the best trial attorney to defend them. They want the person that's going to be an easy conviction, the person who can't put up a fight. And so I've seen that disparity much more than I've seen the racial. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I just think that the rich versus poor disparity in terms of the prosecution of the war on drugs seems to be far more pervasive in my experience. So I just thought I'd mention that. That's been my experience. Of course, others may have a different experience, but it's really horrible, and what it does to the individual, but also to their families and their loved ones, because they get caught up in this perpetual cycle of going to jail, getting out, and being destitute, having nothing, and then resorting to drugs again. So there's that consequence to the war on drugs as well.
That is a fantastic point. Absolutely. Because the people at the bottom of the economic ladder, they get drawn into the drug war. That's another factor here. That we go to church every Sunday, or many of us do, and we pray the Lord's Prayer that says, lead us not into temptation. But we have this gigantic government program that does exactly that, because you've got these exorbitant black market prices. I mean, somebody gets tempted that is having trouble making ends meet and says, man, I can go score with just one drug deal. And then he gets busted because some narc was there, part of the deal. It was a setup. He ends up in 20, 30 years in jail. The rich don't have that problem. Now, that's not to say that there's not rich involved in drug possession and drug distribution, but they're not tempted as much as people at the bottom of the economic ladder. And then, as you point out, they end up with a public defender. Now, there's a lot of good public defenders. I'm not saying they're not as good lawyers as people in the private bar, but generally speaking, the people in the private bar are just better lawyers, and they charge more money, and only the rich can afford them.
And they have a lighter caseload, and they, lots of reasons.
That's what I was just about to say, that the public defender's caseload is enormous. So they can't devote as much time to each case. And so the people at the bottom of the economic ladder pay through the nose for this with, less than quality representation. And they're encouraged to plead guilty many times because they'll get punished if they go to trial and be found guilty. That's the custom, as you know, in the criminal defense business. If you go to trial and you lose, the judge is going to give you a higher sentence than if you pled guilty.
Yeah.
It's a horrific system all the way around.
Yeah. Agreed. All right, Jake. Well, I'm sorry that I don't want to keep you all night. I kind of hope that we'd get to foreign policy, but maybe we can save that for another discussion. I'd like to get to your campaign for president. Would you mind to tell folks, obviously, if they want to know your thoughts on foreign policy or a number of other issues, I encourage them to check out your book, My Passion for Liberty, which I'll link to in the show notes. I know you've also got a campaign website. I think it's jacobforliberty.com. I'll link to that as well. And I know you're active on social media, on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. So I'll link to all those links in the show notes. But if you would talk about, why are you running for president? What inspired you to run, and what do you hope to accomplish by running?
Well, I joined the Libertarian Party 30-something years ago. I served 3 terms on the platform committee, and I was very skeptical about joining the party and serving on the platform committee. When I was invited to do so, it was by a LP activist from California who telephoned me and said, hey, I just started the Future of Freedom Foundation not too long before this. And he says, I'd like you to serve on the platform committee. And I said, no. And he said, why? And I said, because this is a political party. I didn't know much about the LP. I knew about the libertarian movement and the educational foundations and think tanks and so forth. But I said, this is a political party. You guys are compromising libertarian principles to get votes. And I have no interest in that. And he says, have you ever read the party platform? And I said, no. But I said, I know what it is. It's just a bunch of ad hoc policy positions that are all designed to get votes. And he says, let me send you a copy and take a look at it. And so he sent it to me, and I read it. And Alex, I was blown away. I mean, this was 1990. This was a almost, not perfect, but almost a pure libertarian manifesto. Abolish Social Security, abolish Medicare, abolish the FBI, abolish the CIA, open borders. I was stunned. I was absolutely stunned. And I was so impressed. I mean, this thing could have been written by Murray Rothbard, you know? So I called this guy back up and I said, Bill, if you'll still have me, I would love it. I would love to serve on the platform radio. It'd be an honor. And I didn't ask how many people are running for office or how many votes their last presidential candidate got or how much money they had. I didn't ask anything. I was really proud to be part of a party that adhered to libertarian principles. And so, but I noticed even back then that a movement was starting within the party to hide and conceal and abandon libertarian principles because these people were saying that this was an albatross, that our principles were albatrosses, and they were costing us votes. And that when people learned that we stood for open borders or abolishing the CIA or the FBI, that we weren't going to be treated credibly. So there was a movement to water down, hide, conceal, or even abolish. I mean, later on, the provisions on abolishing the FBI and the CIA were deleted, and the open borders position was watered down. And I just thought this was a huge mistake. Even back then, my argument and my friend Bill's argument was, look, our platform is our protection against those kind of people that are running for office, that they're out there telling people that we libertarians like favor the war in Iraq or something. We've got our platform here that can say, oh no, they're wrong, and here's our platform. This was our insurance policy. So I ultimately, I ran for U.S. Senate in 2002, and it was an interesting campaign because it was based on the same principles that I adhere to today. My principles have not changed over the last 40 years. I mean, these are straight, genuine libertarian positions. And I ran in that campaign with this position, abolish Social Security, open borders, et cetera. And my opponents in the party were laughing. They were ridiculing, mocking me, thinking that I was going to really do badly with these positions because Harry Brown had just run in the 2000 presidential race, and he didn't call for open borders. He had a Social Security reform plan, and he had gotten 0.03%, less than 0.5% of the vote. So my opponents, some would say my enemies in the party, were scoffing because they figured if he got 0.03%, I'd get 0.01%. And so I was running against one of the most popular governors in the history of the state, a man named John Warner. He'd been married to the actress Elizabeth Taylor. He was chairman of the Armed Services Committee. This was right after the 9/11 attacks. I'm saying what Ron Paul would say 6 years later, that 9/11 was motivated by U.S. foreign policy. So that did not go over well with Republican audiences in 2002. But I didn't care. I knew I wouldn't get one vote from one Republican. I didn't care. And then the Democrats did not run anybody. But I knew that no Democrat was going to vote for me either because I'm calling for abolishing public schooling, Social Security, Medicare. There was no way that any Democrat would vote for me. I didn't care about that either. I just wanted to run a campaign that was based on pure principle because I suspected that there's people out there who will not join our party, but who will vote for a package of pure libertarian principles. And I campaigned a lot at Black events. I researched where the Black concerts were and Black picnics, and I would go out there and introduce myself and pass my card around because I think that Blacks are a gold mine for libertarians for votes, and that's what I suspected then. So I made an appointment to see a Black minister named John O. Peterson, who was minister with the Alfred Street Baptist Church in Alexandria, Virginia. And I walked in and met with him. And he agreed to see me, and I explained all my positions: abolish Social Security, Medicare, the welfare state, legalize drugs, open borders. At the end of this conversation, this guy later got elected to the African American Hall of Fame. He's one of the most prominent black ministers in the country. At the end of our conversation, he says, Mr. Hornberger, I'm going to endorse your candidacy. And he wrote out a letter of endorsement. He says, you take this to every black minister in the state, you tell them I'm endorsing you. And I did. And so I ended up, Alex, with 7% of the statewide vote. Not 0.07, 7%. And this is with no money, bare bones guerrilla kind of campaign. To this day, I have no doubts that a large share of those votes were blacks. And I also campaigned among Hispanics on my open border position. So a large share of the votes also came in from Hispanics, because I figured there's a lot of Hispanics that hate the death and the suffering in the police state that's going down there, but they don't know there's an alternative. But if you present them with a viable alternative, they jump at it. Well, my opponents in the party were stunned, absolutely stunned. I mean, 7% in a U.S. Senate race. And this is 20 years ago, before anybody even knew what libertarianism was. There was a Lyndon LaRouche candidate. She obviously got all the Democratic votes. But I proved that there's people out there that will vote for our package of principles. So this time around, I ran for president in 2020. I lost the nomination. It was kind of an interesting experience, because I won the Iowa caucuses, and then I won 7 out of 9 primaries, and then I lose the nomination.
Wow.
And so this time around, I said, I'm going to run again. And what's different about my campaign, I've got an uphill battle. I mean, I feel like I'm those salmon swimming upstream, because the party's been running candidates for at least 25 years with this reform message: immigration reform, keep the system intact, just reform it. Social Security reform, Social Security privatization, opt-out plans and all that stuff. Medicare, keep it intact. Same with Medicaid, health savings accounts, direct medical care, immigration, school vouchers, the whole package of reforms. That's what the Libertarian Party has become. And so I said, I'm going to run this campaign with this message of pure principle. And what I'm telling the party, Alex, is that, look, I understand, what I'm up against here. I'm not naive. I mean, I'm going to these conventions and I'm getting attacked by this whole faction of all my opponents. I mean, we're all friends. The 6 of us are running. We all get along really well. But on the debate, I mean, they're after me because, oh my gosh, you would abolish Social Security immediately. People will be dying in the streets, or you would open the borders to everybody. They take the standard what I call the Republican light position. Sometimes I feel like I'm debating Republicans, because those are the Republican positions. In other words, what we've done in the party is run presidential campaigns for at least 25 years that call for reform. Reform this, reform that, reform this, reform this. And we call it liberty, but it's not liberty. Reform is reform. Just like reform of slavery would not have been freedom for slaves. It's just reform. So I'm running a campaign that is totally distinguishable from all my opponents, with the restoration of pure, genuine libertarian principles. Dismantle the immigration system, open borders, abolish Social Security and Medicare immediately, restore faith in freedom. They're so scared. They say, all my opponents want a 25-year, what they call off-ramp, where Social Security and Medicare continue for 25 years. Because they say that freedom from these socialist programs would mean people dying in the streets. So who's going to vote for a party whose presidential candidate is saying freedom doesn't work? We stand for freedom in our party, but freedom brings death and suffering, and we've got to continue socialism for 25 years. And what's going to happen 25 years from now? All the 40-year-olds who are now 65 are going to say, wait, we need another 25 years. So it's really a program into perpetuity. What I'm saying is, the reason for the 1% that our candidates just get, and 1% is pretty standard, that our presidential candidate 3 years ago got 1%. And now there's 2 Wall Street Journal polls that are already telling us the result of the 2024 election, 1%. And they mentioned libertarian. And 99% of the respondents are saying, we're not voting for libertarians, even though we hate Biden and Trump. And so the standard assumption in the party has been, oh, well, there's nothing wrong with what we're saying. The problem is with the voter. We need to get our message out. My contention is this is pure nonsense. Everybody knows where we stand for. We've been running the same kind of message for 25 years. The problem's with the message. It's a bad message. Reform is a good message for Republicans. It's a horrific message for libertarians. There's no constituency for it. I was at the Georgia Libertarian Party convention this last weekend, and I said, the Libertarian candidate that supports immigration controls will get 0 votes from outsiders. And it stunned people. I mean, it was just like, oh my gosh, that's not possible because immigration controls are so popular. And then I pointed out, but every single proponent of immigration controls is going to vote for Trump. They're never going to waste their vote on a libertarian. It'd be stupid to waste your vote on a libertarian. And so, but my position, open borders, will garner all the votes of the people that really hate this system, but don't know there's a viable alternative. Once they're presented with a viable alternative, they will leap. And so I have no doubts. I can double what I did 20 years ago with this message. But it's a message of pure principle. And like a lot of the younger people in the party that have been there for 10, 15 years have never heard this message. They're stunned when they hear it, saying, I want to run a presidential campaign that is based 100%, no exceptions. Open borders, abolish Social Security and Medicare immediately, legalize all drugs, dismantle the national security state, restore a limited government republic with a basic military force, separate money in the state, healthcare in the state, education in the state, no school vouchers, no education reform. And that's the campaign I want to run, Alex. But I got a tough row to hoe here, and I'm not naive. I knew what I was up against 3 years ago, and I know what I'm up against now. I'm running not just a campaign to win the nomination. I'm running a campaign to shift the entire philosophy of the party toward its original founding principles and away from reform, because reform gets us nowhere. The 2 Wall Street Journal polls are already establishing that for us, the election's over. It's at 1%. Unless we change directions and in a big way, completely and dramatically. And that's a campaign of principle. I'm saying to the party, let's give the American people something they are totally not expecting this time around. A campaign that is based totally on our principles. And so that's where I am. I got a tough row to hoe, but who knows?
This reminds me, your campaign, and I'm certain you'll have much more success than this. So please don't take it this way, or a way that is offensive in some way, because I love what you're doing. I love your campaign based on principle, but in some ways you're embracing, what you learned from that event, that supper seminar in Minneapolis, right? You can't measure success necessarily by how many votes you get, but are you delivering the message that people need to hear, the message that hopefully people like me will hear and pass on to someone else, and you enlarge that group of people over time who hold those fundamental libertarian principles and apply that to government and to the way we treat what we expect from our libertarian candidates for president. So whether you get 0.3% or 7% or whatever that percentage is, I think the message is important for people to hear nevertheless.
I totally agree with you. I mean, I would rather support a Libertarian Party candidate that adheres to principle, totally to principle, that gets 0.5% of the vote, as compared to one that waters down the principles, essentially adopts the Republican Party principles, and gets 30% of the vote. I mean, to me, it's worthless to get 30% of the vote if you've gotten that vote by advocating principles that belong to another party and that violate your own principles. So I absolutely, totally agree with you. And Richard Ebeling, who we've talked about earlier, says the same thing to me. He says, Jacob, you're doing the right thing here. I mean, you're exposing people in the party. I mean, see, I would love to win this nomination to ignite a revolution for freedom out there, outside the party in America. And I think you can only do that with principles. You can't do it with reform. People don't get excited over reform. They get bored with reform proposals. But our principles, I think, are the greatest thing in the world. I mean, the title of my book is My Passion for Liberty. They're our greatest assets. I really believe that they can achieve a big vote turnout, just like they did 20 years ago for me. But that's not what motivates me. What motivates me is putting out that message, as you say, and influencing people toward liberty. That's how we achieve a free society, not through reform, but by people hearing ideas and shifting their mindset. And I'll give you an example of this. At the Georgia Libertarian Party convention, I had a guy come up to me at the end of it, and he says, Jacob, I have been a proponent of immigration controls for many, many years. He says, today, after hearing you, I'm a proponent of open borders. And I can't tell you how gratifying that is. Just one guy telling me that I've influenced his life.
Yeah.
It's tremendous.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, that's certainly motivation to keep doing what you're doing. So, well, Jacob, I really appreciate you joining the show. I really enjoyed speaking with you again. Of course, I enjoyed our last discussion about the tyranny of gun control, which I'll link to that discussion in the show notes. But here in closing, is there anything else you'd like to say, or any resources you'd like to point out to folks before we close up the show?
No, I think that pretty much covers everything. And let me just say, Alex, thank you very much. You and I have a lot in common. It's kind of interesting with your practicing law and starting out in life, and you've discovered libertarianism. It brings back some memories to me as a young lawyer discovering libertarianism. And of course, I didn't have the vehicle to do this with on the internet and stuff back then. But I really want to tell you how appreciative I am for taking so much time and giving me an opportunity to expound upon my views. It's a nice little honor for you to give me this opportunity, and I'm very appreciative. And I wish you all the well, and may you win every single one of your cases.
even if it's broken pottery and there's no justice, right?
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
All right. Well, thanks, Jacob. I certainly appreciate you taking the time to chat with me. I really enjoyed it, and good luck with the campaign. Of course, I'll link to all the links to your campaign and social media that are related to your campaign. So thanks again.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right, everybody, I hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe to help us spread the message of freedom. As always, you can find the show on YouTube, Rumble, Facebook, and just about any of the most popular podcast streaming platforms. Of course, liberty starts with you. It's individual liberty that we're fighting for. We don't get our liberties from the government. Our liberties start with the individual, and that's the whole theme behind this show. Is that together, as individuals, we are the forge of freedom. And so until next time, remember, you are the forge of freedom.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Forge of Freedom. Be sure to subscribe wherever you heard this podcast so you never miss a future episode. For more information or to connect with Alex, you can go to forgeoffreedom.com or follow him on Twitter @ForgeOfFreedom. Until next time, remember, you are the Forge of Freedom.